In this video, we're going to talk about libraries. Let's start with covering what they are. So a library is a collection of code, effectively, that gives your Arduino environment more capabilities, and mainly in terms of communicating with other devices. So let's dig into that a little bit further. So to go to libraries, or to look at what libraries you have installed on your machine, you'd go under Sketch, Included Libraries, and then you can see a whole list of the libraries that you have installed. So there's some that are recommended, some that are contributed, and then the standard Arduino libraries, effectively. So going back to the question about what a library is, it's code that enhances what your Arduino IDE is capable of doing when you write your sketches. Let's look at an example here. If I go into where these files are stored, so let's take a step back here. We'll go to the C drive, then into Program Files, x86 on my machine, then into Arduino, and then into Libraries. Now in Libraries, you'll notice that this list of folders is effectively very similar to the list we saw earlier on when looking at our Include Library area. So effectively, those libraries are stored in this folder. Let's just jump into one of the libraries and take a look at what a library actually is. So going into the Bridge folder, I can see there's an SRC folder, which stands for source, I believe. And once we go in there, you can see the different files that relate to the Bridge library. So there's a couple of things to notice. Wherever you've got Bridge, or wherever you've got this collection of libraries, so here we've got Bridge Client, it's a standard Bridge SSL client. I don't necessarily know what these libraries do at this stage. However, the structure is what stands out. You've got a .h file and .cpp, and that's repeated on each instance. You've got a .h file and .cpp. Now the .h bit actually relates to a header file, effectively, in the world of C++. So the CPP stands for C++, which is a programming language. If we open up this file here, let's open it in WordPad. That's a fairly old word editing tool there, but ultimately it does lay it out in the format that we can read. So this is C++ code when you actually look at it. Now, I'm not a programmer by any stretch of imagination, but I can understand that when looking at a file with the extension CPP and then opening that up, you can read that there's a lot of code going on here, some conditions to get certain results out. So when you're writing your sketches in your Arduino IDE, you can effectively make calls to those libraries. So if I went to Sketch and said Include Library and went for the Bridge library, for example, it's gone ahead and included the different libraries that are within that library pack. This means I can reference these libraries in my sketch and get my sketch to do other things outside of what's the norm. So one of the selling points about this Arduino IDE environment is that it's really meant for people like me, i.e. beginners, who don't necessarily know code inside out or know much about writing code, but just looking for a simplistic way for us to interface with hardware. So the more complex code is what's being captured in these libraries. So things like communicating with a mouse or a keyboard. At a very core level, the actual communication protocol is what these libraries allow us to do. So it's not just about connecting to devices. Some libraries allow you to manipulate data, for example, but it's the more difficult code that you don't want to have to write each time you create a sketch, but it's reusable packages of codes that different people can use. So it's a bit of a long description of what these sketches are, what these libraries are rather, that you can include in your sketches. So if we go back to the include library menu and then go to manage libraries, the library manager is effectively pulling a list of libraries from the net. So it's going on to the Arduino website and possibly other resources and pulling back the information that's needed to display here. So here you can see I've got a long list of libraries that I can install if I wanted to. And here you can see the libraries that are already installed. Okay, written and installed in green. So if I scroll through these and let's say I find a particular library that I'm interested in. I don't really know what these are, to be fair, at this point in time, still learning this whole environment. But let's go for USB host. Sounds like something I might use. So here you can see there's different versions. I would imagine that if you've written your code to work with version 3, I'd imagine that the versions are backward compatible, but you might want to stick to a particular version because of how you've written your code or particular functionality that may be deprecated or removed rather in later versions. So it's good that you can choose whichever version you want to work with. I'd imagine that by default it selects the latest version, and what I can do at that point is I can install the library host. So this library host allows communication with USB peripherals like mice, keyboards, and thumb drives. So it sounds like something I would end up using anyway. So let's go for it. So the installation, when I click install, it goes through, updates the list of libraries again, runs through the installation, and completes it. So that's effectively put the library onto my machine. So if I search for USB in my list here, you'll see anything that has USB mentioned in it gets returned here. But here USB host previously wasn't installed, and now it is. So it's now part of my library list. And I can include it in my code if I wanted to. So let's kind of take out the bridge code we had earlier on. When I go to my sketch, include libraries, and then go down this list here, you can see USB host is now part of the list. And I've got different files there that I can bring in, .header files that we are talking about earlier on, that link back to the file that, or the area of the file that we need to utilize. So that's what libraries are. They are, and that's how you install them. They are files that effectively get included or are made available to your IDE environment for you to use within your sketches. It's the more difficult part of the code. I wouldn't say difficult per se, but more involving, that you don't necessarily want to rewrite each individual time. It's written in the language called C++, and you know it's fairly easy to access. So if I went on to the Arduino website, you've also got libraries listed there, and it goes into a lot more detail about what's contained in the libraries, who wrote them, etc., etc. So on the website, if you go to resources, references, and then libraries, you'll find again the same list of libraries. These are what they call standard libraries. And then you'll see a whole list of different ones that you can choose, written by different people. Robot always is fairly interesting. So this one, Arduino Robot Library, you click into that and you can see all the different commands that it allows you to use, and it goes into fairly good documentation describing what it allows you to do, the different commands that you can use. And in some instances, I'm not sure where at this point in time, is that you can actually get to the raw library file. Let's have a look here. Okay, so this is the IDE download. So you can get to the raw library file, which you can effectively download as a .zip file, and that's another alternative route to adding libraries to your list of libraries here. So you can add a .zip library. So the idea is that you wouldn't uninstall the library, or you wouldn't necessarily unzip the library. You'd push it in as a zipped file. So let's navigate to one of those zip files. I've got one here. So if we go back to the Elegoo CD that they provide, one of the folders on there is one called Libraries. And in the libraries folder, you'll find a bunch of zip files. And these are the same libraries or similar libraries to what we see in our library manager list, except that you've got two options in which you can install them. One is through that library manager, or two is to download the zip files and use them. Now, the .zip is obviously compressed files, so you don't have to, but you don't have to extract them into the individual files. So if we chose this liquid crystal zip file and chose open, what that's going to do is library added to your libraries. Check included menu. So you can see the message down here is effectively telling us that it's done that job fairly quickly. You didn't see a progress bar or anything, but effectively what it's done is copied that library into the right location and made those files available. So if we go into our list here, what I'm looking at for is the liquid crystal. There we go. It's down here, contributed libraries, liquid crystal library. So that's been added. So this list will get long, but as you just saw, you get a arrow to navigate up or down the list of libraries. I haven't really seen a way to uninstall libraries, but I would imagine that you just simply take out the folder for the library in the libraries folder on your hard drive. But again, that's another way to install a library. The other thing I also found is while Elegoo has been kind enough to give us the libraries, zip libraries on their CD, if you went into Google and just searched Arduino Libraries, and then look for them on GitHub, you can download the same zip files from GitHub as well. So it's another area where people are developing libraries, contributing, having conversations around them, different threads that come off the back of it. But there you'll see again C++. These libraries are written in C++. That's the main language you'd get libraries. I don't think you can write them in any other, although C# rather, or C is the other, I suppose. Here, as you can see, this Wi-Fi 101 is written in C as opposed to C++. And if we go down the list here, most of them are either C or C++. This one here I think is a filter here. So if I just went to the filter and went for Java, firmware update plugin. So it does look like you can write in other languages. You can write these libraries in other languages. I wouldn't say that for sure. There's only two of these here. But the main point here is that there's also GitHub is a good place to download libraries from, and also understand what's behind them, see who wrote them, how many people contribute. Yeah, this one's got 4 contributors. The number of releases it's had, the files that you'd get within the actual file that you download. And there's so much information there, but it's again community-driven, open source type of activity going on. So again, a great forum for getting that information out. I was thinking about what analogy I can use to describe libraries, but to an extent, when you buy your mobile phone, it probably comes with a limited number of apps that allow you to communicate, to make phone calls, etc., etc. The core functionality of what it needs to do, and that covers probably most of what you typically need. But you can extend it by adding more apps. So adding WhatsApp, for example, allows you to chat to the rest of the world, regardless of what platform they're on. In terms of what type of phone they're on or what type of OS they're using. WhatsApp is kind of platform agnostic from that perspective, but you can also add apps that interact with hardware. So locking your house at home or changing the heating at your home is another app that you install on your phone and extend what your app means to you. So banking apps, for example, go onto your phone, and again, you now it becomes your financial manager or whatever the case may be. So libraries are kind of things or apps that you can extend your Arduino sketches and make them do bigger and better things, but by communicating with these external devices or by manipulating data. But you don't have to understand the complexity behind the actual library. All you need to do is include it and reference it and use it in your sketch, but you don't really need to know how complex or what's been written behind the scenes. Of course, it's always good to have an idea, but it's not necessary. There'll be more of curiosity. You don't have to code all the things you see. And that's my kind of parting note on it. I think the phone and app sort of analogy may not be 100% correct, but it makes sense to me in terms of what a library is. Hope that was useful.